Hello and welcome to Reporters on France 24. I'm Emma Nelson. And this week we take you to Egypt to meet the country's Coptic Christians. It's a community with 15 million followers, the largest Christian group in the Middle East. Since Egypt's revolution in 2011, the Copts have experienced a period of great turbulence. Under Mohamed Morsi and his Muslim Brotherhood, there was a wave of violence committed against Christians. So it's perhaps no great surprise that once the Muslim Brotherhood were driven from power, the Copts welcomed the arrival of the country's new leader, al-Sisi. But since then, they've faced fresh challenges, the spread of the Islamic State group and other jihadist organisations, and it's led to attacks against the Copts in the past 2 years. But the Copts aren't the only ones to be targeted. In November 2017, in North Sinai, jihadists attacked a mosque, carrying out the worst atrocity in Egypt's recent history. Well, France 24's Jonathan Walsh and Hussein El Ghanaini report on how the Copts see their future in this volatile country.
Dressed in their black mourning clothes, a group of women attend Mass. Today, 800 widows have gathered in the parish of Beni Mazar. Each of them has been given a warm winter blanket. We're in the province of Al-Minya, one of the poorest in Egypt. In this region, the church is often the only source of help and comfort for those in need. Samar has come from Cairo to help with the distribution of aid. She says the need to stand together has never been greater.
The state can't do everything. We're a big family. We could all come up against such problems. And we all need to help each other out. Given what's been going on in Alexandria, in Cairo, in Tanta, and in Al-Minya, terrorism is clearly everywhere.
Since the end of 2016, there's been an unprecedented wave of attacks against the country's Copts, a series of events that still haunts the Christian community.
I'm not scared for myself, but I fear for my people. It's very sad. All these youngsters who have had their whole lives ahead of them have now been killed in such a brutal way. It's impossible to bear for everyone.
Miriam has experienced the brutality firsthand. In May last year, she went to the St. Samuel Monastery with friends and relatives, a trip that took them 200 kilometers into the desert. Suddenly, a gang of armed men attacked their convoy, killing some of the pilgrims in cold blood. Miriam lost several members of her family. She managed to escape with her youngest son, who had just an injury to his hand.
They fired on us as they shouted, "God is great." They said that killing us was legitimate. I don't understand. We left as a happy family, all together. And I came back without my mother, without my brother, and without my husband. Today, I can only think of one thing, and that's leaving with my children. I can't stand being in Egypt anymore. I can't handle the life here. I'm trying to leave in any way I can.
Miriam is far from alone. Many Christians have chosen to escape in recent years, even before the attacks began. We head now to Alexandria, a port on the Mediterranean Sea. It's here that Nasri Marco runs a respected solicitor's practice. A large chunk of his working day is now taken up dealing with the Copts who hope to leave Egyptian shores. Most of them are well off and well educated.
Since the revolution, we've dealt with around 6,000 cases in this office alone. They're all Coptic families wanting to move overseas. It's a brain drain. Doctors, engineers, scientists, writers, all these kinds of people have now sadly left Egypt.
The hemorrhage accelerated when the Muslim Brotherhood came to power in 2012. They unleashed a wave of attacks targeting the Christians, and many now view the army as a kind of shield.
They've burned down nearly 100 churches. They've slaughtered Copts in their villages. They even stopped them from going to vote. That's why there's been a counter-revolution in Egypt, one in which we chose the army to come and help us, to save our country, and to save us from this powerful influence and the extremism of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt.
Nasri Marco now welcomes us into his luxurious home away from the city centre. Although he helps Christians leave the country, he would prefer the community to remain as a pillar of Egyptian society.
I have 2 PhDs, I've had an international career, and I've succeeded thanks to my own hard work. My 2 sons who've done their PhD in Europe and who have moved back to Egypt now work 16 hours a day. The large majority of Christians have worked hard too in Egypt and succeeded 100%.
But he's also keen to stress that the current regime shouldn't be idealized and that there are huge hurdles to overcome.
The government, or this junta that runs the country at the moment, is not open and has no access to ordinary people, to society, and to this intelligentsia that exists in Egypt. We live in a really rich country, but they've kept their heads buried in the sand. They only started to integrate themselves because of the revolution. If not, they'd simply have stayed a world apart.
Today's Egypt is ruled with an iron fist, and the penalties for political opposition can be severe. Protests are banned on the streets of Cairo, or in any other city for that matter. During the revolution, Vivian took part in the groundswell of rallies on Tahrir Square and is strongly opposed to the current hard line. She's also against the stance her church has taken since the early days of the revolution.
Back then, the church ordered Coptic Christians not to protest, but I went anyway. I was there chanting slogans. One day, someone spotted the cross that's tattooed on my hand, and they said they were surprised to see me there, given what the church had been saying. I just replied that we were there simply as Egyptians, as citizens, and that we had nothing to do with the church.
On the 9th of October 2011, Vivian took part in a mainly Christian rally, but the army's response was brutal. Nearly 30 people lost their lives in front of the headquarters of the national TV channel Mespero. Vivian's fiancé was among those killed.
Michael was on the ground and I was screaming at his side. The soldiers just carried on hitting him. They thought he'd just fallen, but he was already unconscious. I fell on him to block their punches, so they started to hit me instead. I held him tight in my arms until they stopped. The Maspero massacre really showed the army for what it is.
But neither this traumatic episode nor the violence that's continued since then have changed her mind. She's long criticized her community's choice to isolate itself.
The problem with the Christian community is that they live too close to the church. It's a place that's become a state within a state. Christians spend 90% of their time as part of the church, and they just say to themselves, we don't need to talk to anyone else. And that's a problem. When I went to church, I used to try and tell them there's this whole world outside and that they should go and discover it.
The church still exerts considerable control over the Coptic community. It spends huge amounts of money to attract youngsters, with its members a regular feature on TV shows. Archbishop Marcos runs 2 TV channels. Today, he's introducing us to one of his latest stars.
Kuji is the main character of the channel. The station is actually named after him. It's a channel that's aimed at children, up until secondary school age. It broadcasts religious, cultural, and civic programs.
The Archbishop is also the spokesperson for the Coptic Church. He takes his role as the face of the faith on TV very seriously.
They're clearly patriotic ideas for loving and helping one's country, and loving each other despite one's differences. One can go to church for just an hour, but here you can be with us 24 hours a day.
The links between the church and authorities are well established. In January 2015, President al-Sisi came to St. Mark's Cathedral for the Nativity celebrations. The Coptic bishop, Tawadros II, was at his side. It was an historic first, broadcast live across the nation.
A handful of extremists chose to target Christians, but it goes against the state's official line and the Constitution. Thanks to God, honestly, we're living in a golden age, and we are enjoying great freedoms.
But not when it comes to security. The Egyptian branch of the Islamic State group is now firmly rooted in the North Sinai Peninsula. The last Christians fled this region in 2017 after a wave of violent attacks. Most had lived in the Al-Arish area. The state has rehoused the vast majority close to Ismailia. It's there that some of these refugees have agreed to meet us in a church. For many of these women, the trauma has been unbearable.
They chose to target us. They weren't even targeting soldiers. They destroyed our home. They destroyed us.
The jihadists appeared to be well informed. They targeted Christians in their homes, and it was often the men that were singled out.
My life stopped that day. I lost my father, my brother. My mother was thrown onto the streets. Their house was torn down, and we were forced out in these terrible conditions. The bodies were taken to a morgue, and I wasn't even able to say goodbye to them.
The Egyptian military has also paid a heavy price in recent years. The armed forces have been the frequent target of attacks, and they have still not regained control of the northern part of the peninsula.
They attack both Muslims and Christians. The soldiers that have been killed were both Muslims and Christians. We're scared to go back there. Until security has been shored up, we won't be going back.
The whole country is in danger. It's not just Al-Arish and Sinai that are affected, but the threat there is greater than elsewhere. Ever since the revolution began, terrorism has been very present there.
A few days after that meeting, the deadliest attack in the country's recent history occurred at a mosque in Bir al-Abed, close to Al-Arish. The bloodshed left over 300 worshippers dead, among them dozens of children. That day, the terrorists showed they would spare nobody. We've now come to meet Eva Boutros in the capital Cairo, barely a few hours after that attack. She's long been helping the victims of such bloodshed. For her, there's one key lesson to learn.
The same place the Christians were persecuted and evacuated, and the same place the Muslims were crushed and killed inside the mosque. It's the same devil, it's the same Satan that attacks both of us. So it keeps us more and more united to face what is going on and what we are facing as a country.
Eva believes that this feeling of unity already existed during the revolution. Back then, her church was turned into a hospital to treat those injured during the unrest on Tahrir Square. As a qualified doctor, she was very much in demand.
The people who came to us Muslims, they are not familiar about being inside a church, or they didn't expect that one day ever in their life they will be inside the church. Connections and links of love happened that you can never imagine. Because in the tough time, we melted together in a way that you can't imagine how is it like.
The very next day, Eva goes to a hospital in Ismailia to offer help and comfort to those wounded in that mosque attack. We try to film her visit, but our cameras aren't welcome. We catch up with her a little later.
We wanted them to feel that the rescue of Qasr Dubara Church are coming here to cry with you, to support you. They are wounded not because of the bullets and the stuff they showed us, but they are wounded because they didn't expect that any human nature can do something like this in life.
We've now moved on to Rizeigat, some 40 kilometers to the south of Luxor. The Festival of St. George attracts hundreds of thousands of pilgrims each year. And judging by this November's turnout, numbers aren't waning.
We come every year. It's a must. We come as a family and we catch up with loved ones we haven't seen in a year. It's the one time when we can all be together and have a great time. We love the festival and these sacred songs.
Throughout the week, the faithful come to honour their patron saint. But the flock isn't just made up of Coptic Christians. The event also attracts other religions.
No distinction is made here between Christians and Muslims. In northern Egypt, the two faiths live in harmony. But evil forces try and cause trouble in a bid to divide us.
When we are in the hands of God, we're not afraid. Despite all the threats and the attacks, we're still standing tall.
This jubilant crowd stands as a symbol in an Egypt that continues to be rocked by violent attacks. These pilgrims are proud of their show of solidarity and their united front in the face of extremism.
You've been watching Reporters on France 24. Stay tuned for more news in just a moment.